Welcome back for another episode of Branching Out with Sierra. In today's episode, we're talking about how to make every minute count. And when I'm talking about how to make every minute count, I'm not just talking about how you're managing your time. I'm talking about meetings today. Meetings that matter. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about the importance of how you approach meetings in your organization, because meetings are expensive. And when I say they're expensive, I mean they take a lot of time, which also means you're paying a lot of people to be in that room. It takes a lot of energy, attention, and the way in which you run your meetings can really impact your culture. I've found over the years that most leaders, just because they have a title, don't necessarily know how to run an effective meeting. A lot of times I've seen leaders show up unprepared for the meeting, even if they were the one facilitating it, not sure of where to go and leaning on others to help them get there. So I've always really enjoyed working with my clients and helping them to have more effective meetings. I've had some clients bring me in specifically just to observe one of their typical meetings so that I could give feedback, help them design an agenda that better works for them, and make sure that they're maximizing their time when they're together. I was thinking about this topic because it just came up in the past month or so with one of my clients. What happened was I was having individual sessions with team members, and one of the team members expressed to me that they were no longer having their weekly team meetings. And immediately my heart sunk because I've been working with this client for a couple of years, and I know that those meetings are so powerful for that team. They really help them to build relationships. There's a lot of team building built into it. Those meetings help people to get feedback that they need on the projects that they're working on, so they feel like they have a sounding board. The meetings were serving a lot of purposes for this entire organization, and suddenly they stopped. And when I heard that, I knew I needed to get to the bottom of, what had changed, why had we taken it away, but how could I use this as an opportunity to really investigate how important were meetings actually to the culture of this organization, to them getting, forward momentum, having clarity as to what their goals were in the business. And so I really used it as an opportunity to get feedback. So we approached it as, okay, you've gone without meetings for a few weeks. What do you miss about them? What are you missing? What did you get in those meetings that you're not getting now that you're not meeting with the full team on a weekly basis? So it ended up being a great opportunity for us to dig deeper into the meetings, and we ended up being able to make them more effective by doing so. But that's really what inspired today's episode, because it's just been top of mind. I've been invited so many times to different meetings to give feedback, and I don't know why I'm so passionate about having an effective meeting. Maybe because I love focusing on efficiency, being efficient, making sure everybody's getting what they need in that team setting. And so to me, I immediately see opportunities for improvement when I come into a meeting. So what do I typically see when I walk into a meeting that maybe someone that's designing the agenda hasn't had a ton of experience in building effective meetings or facilitating them before? A lot of times there's no clear purpose for the meeting. So if I were to ask individuals why they're meeting, they might not be able to tell me why they're having that meeting other than this is what we do. This is what we do every week. Not really sure the purpose of it. I also find that there are often people in the room that don't need to be in the room. Based on the topics that are going to be discussed in the meeting, there are people that don't need to be present, and so they're sitting there feeling like it's a waste of time. it is actually a waste of time. They're thinking of all the things that they should be doing, so they're not fully engaged anyway. So that is a typical problem. Sometimes I go to meetings that people are just reading a list of updates that could have been sent as an email. So they're calling it a meeting, but everything that was stated was just informational and could have been read in an email, and everybody would have had a common understanding. A lot of times I go to meetings and people don't have specific roles within the meeting. So there's no one that's taking notes. There's no one that's keeping time. There's no one that specifically is the facilitator, whether a facilitator of the entire meeting or of certain portions of the meeting. There isn't already an expectation set of who's doing the talking and keeping things moving along. So then it's the confusion around who's next, who's going to take this part, and all of it is a waste of time. I've been to plenty of meetings where no decisions are ever made. There's a lot of talking, and the intention was to make a decision, but none was made. And so people walk away feeling frustrated because they don't feel like they made forward progress, and there's going to have to be another meeting in order to get there. So that's a good way to leave people frustrated. And then beyond just what happens in the meeting, I see a lot of situations where there's no follow through after the meeting. So people commit to things in the meeting, or maybe someone assigns them something in a meeting. They didn't necessarily commit to it, but something's assigned to them. And then that thing never happens, and you come to the next meeting and you're expecting that thing to be completed, maybe updates provided on it, and it's not done. There was no follow through. So these are just some of the common problems that I've seen. I'm sure you've experienced at least one of them. But I really want to spend some time today looking at how leading a meeting really is a leadership skill. And so when we're having ineffective meetings, it's not really a time problem, it's a leadership problem. And just sitting in on a meeting is really a reflection of the culture of the organization. So it's another opportunity to be intentional versus letting it be chaotic, not really having a clear plan for it. So that's what I want to dig into today. I want to make this actionable. I want to share what can you do to improve your meetings. Not everything that I share might apply to you, but hopefully you can find one thing that would help you no matter what kind of meeting you're having. Even if you're not part of a large organization that typically has meetings, maybe you apply this as a solopreneur to a client meeting and the way you're approaching your meetings with a client. It could be anyone, a vendor you're working with, anytime you are having a meeting. So the first thing that I recommend that you do is define the meeting's purpose. Every single meeting that you go into should have a clear purpose. Sometimes you go into a meeting, as mentioned, to inform people of something. Sometimes when you're just informing people, an email will do. But other times, delivery is important, tone is important. You want to give people the opportunity to ask questions. Like the other day, I watched a meeting where an organization was rolling out a new attendance policy. There were a lot of comments and questions. But if that new policy had just been sent out via email with no meeting, it would not have gone over well. So it was to inform, but it had to be more than an email. So you could be having a meeting to share updates, to share information in that way. It could be a meeting to discuss a topic. Maybe you're discussing the direction you want to move, brainstorming ideas together, just really using it as an opportunity to collaborate with your teammates. That could be the purpose of the meeting. It could be a meeting where you intend to make a decision by the time the meeting is over, and that's what you've committed to doing. You may have the purpose of a meeting to get everyone in alignment, to do check-ins with everyone, make sure that they're being held accountable for the things that they're supposed to be doing, make sure everybody's on the same page on a project, right? Something bigger that you're working on. And finally, you could be having a meeting where the sole purpose is to create something together. Maybe you're creating a new strategy, you're problem solving an issue, any sort of brainstorming, something creative as a group. But you should be able to identify that from the beginning. Is it sometimes a combo of those? Might you have a meeting agenda where one portion of the meeting you're making a decision on something that's been discussed in the past and now you're coming back together to make a decision? That's one agenda item. And then you move into something else where then there's an accountability piece or you're brainstorming solutions to a different problem, whatever it may be. Yes, it's just important that you're clear how many of those things are happening in a meeting and what those outcomes should be. So if you're not able to name the purpose of the meeting in a sentence or two, you probably shouldn't meet because you need greater clarity as to what you're trying to achieve. Especially when you are meeting on a regular basis, and like for this team, they're meeting weekly. That's a lot of time. It's taking a lot of time out of the schedule. You know, if they're meeting an hour and a half every week and they're not truly being intentional with the time and they don't know the purpose for the meeting, maybe not everybody's walking away with what they need to have felt like it was a good use of their time, then it's time to redesign that meeting, because at some point it's just doing it because it's what you have done in the past, not because you think it's a good use of your time. So that's part one. Step one, I say, really just figure out the purpose of the meeting. Step two, I would say consider who should be in the room. Who is going to add value to the conversation? Who needs to be a part of that decision that you are making? Who is going to be impacted by the decisions that are going to be made? Is there a stakeholder that needs to be in the room? But people should know why they specifically are there, not they as a collective, but they as the individual. Why are they in the room? They should know that. How are they contributing to this meeting? If you cannot identify your role in the meeting, you probably don't need to be there. I did admit recently that a couple of meetings that I knew I didn't really need to be at, but I have like my AI note taker that, you know, joins meetings that I'm on and is very helpful for me. It has popped into meetings that I am not at, and it allows me to have the notes and the key points and stay in the loop as to what decisions are being made and what's happening when I'm not there. But it's not taking my time to physically be there. So I am very intentional about what I do allow my AI to join and not join. And I don't just leave it on full time to where it joins any meeting that I have on my calendar. At the beginning of each week, I actually go through and select which appointments I want it to be a part of and which I don't. So if it pops into a meeting, it's popping in there because I want it in there to get the notes, but I don't think that I am going to add value to that conversation or I need to be in that room. So I would really consider who needs to be in the room, who needs to be a part of this conversation, and make sure that they know why they're in the room too. That's going to impact how they prepare for the meeting if they know why they're going to be in the meeting. So cut the attendee list every single time and make sure that you're being intentional about who's in the room. Again, it's an expense to have everybody sitting in a meeting, so you want to make sure it's a good use of everybody's time. The next thing that I really think people should consider is the agenda. To me, this is crucial. I remember when I taught in Fairfax County Public Schools, this is one of the first things that I wanted to help redesign was when we were having our team meetings as a grade level. How can we create more effective agendas and this be a good use of everybody's time, because we were doing it weekly. And I couldn't help but think that when I was in those meetings, man, I could really use this time back in my classroom, to be doing all the things, cleaning up the classroom, grading the papers, but also creating my own lesson plans. So how can I be sure that when I'm taking the time to meet with the team, that we're walking away with enough new ideas and strategies and everybody aligned and on the same page that it was a good use of time? So that's where I feel like I first maybe started to get a little anal about how meetings are run, because, we had 8 people around a table and a lot of time was spent there. So how do you create an agenda that's meaningful? Well, that goes back to knowing the purpose of the meeting. So number one, I would always have a column as a part of my meeting agenda, that for each agenda item, it clearly defined, is this part of the meeting to inform, to discuss, to decide, to align, to create, right? I should be able to identify what purpose that section is serving. So I would list all the talking points, all the discussion topics, whatever it may be, that we need for that meeting. And I would allot a certain amount of time for the conversation. To me, it is important that you start a meeting on time and you end on time. So as you are looking to create an agenda, if it's a 60-minute meeting, and you have 5 topics, you have to really think through, how much time can I spend on each one? Or do I need to spend more time on some of these, and some of these go into the parking lot and we use them for a future meeting because it's just not going to work? Only you can decide that, because you know to what depth you need to discuss things. But though it was always painful for me, I always spent the first couple of minutes with grounding. So sometimes that grounding just meant people could chat. They could chat about anything personal they wanted. Because I'm task driven and I like to do business first and get things done, that was always hard for me, but it was intentionally built in because I knew that people that were higher I's, higher S's, more social, focused on relationship building, they had to get that part out of their system before they could really talk shop, right? Talk business, speak about the professional topics. So I would put 2 minutes of grounding at the beginning. Either to just openly chat, or we would actually have a prompt where we go around and discuss it, and it's like an icebreaker. Really depended. But I do recommend, no matter what team you're on, even if it's just 2 minutes at the beginning, thinking about the people in the room who are people-oriented and do need the time to connect before they can truly engage in the professional conversation. So when I say time-bound, I mean time-bound down to the grounding at the beginning. So 2 minutes for that. We go into our first topic. Oh, we discussed this last time. Now we're making a decision. So maybe we allow 1 minute for each person to go around and say any final thoughts, and then we vote and we make a decision. Okay, this section's going to take 15 minutes max. It is important that the person facilitating that meeting keeps everything on time, because And of course, it takes constant assessment. We might go 2 minutes over on this. Is there any other topic on the agenda where we could pull 2 minutes from? You have to be a little bit flexible, but you should keep it pretty time bound. And then outcome driven for each section, I kind of mentioned there. So agenda items, decide, discuss, review, solve, align. They should begin with a verb. You should be clear in what you're actually doing. Things need to be prioritized on the agenda, so not just a random compilation of all the things that you're doing, but knowing that something might happen and you might not get to everything on it. So prioritize, make sure that the things that are going to help you build the most momentum and help people move forward when they walk outside of that room or get off of the Zoom call, those have to be at the front of the meeting. Visible ahead of time. Your meeting agenda technically should be sent out in advance. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, if someone has to prepare something to facilitate a certain portion of that meeting, they need to know that in advance with an appropriate amount of time to prepare. Thinking about disc styles, there are definitely people in the room always who are going to be more comfortable discussing or deciding if they've seen things in advance and they've had time to process and they're not feeling put on the spot in the moment as a part of that meeting. So being able to review it in advance, have the comfort and security of knowing what they're walking into, predictability of what's to come in that meeting, that's comforting for a high S to know what they're walking into. So you want it to be visible in advance. For each section of the meeting, you're also going to want to list who is facilitating that portion. So as I mentioned before, you might have one facilitator that facilitates the whole thing, or you might pass the baton during certain parts of the meeting. But in general, I think it's best practice to have one facilitator, and they are basically pulling people in when they need it, but it always goes back to them to help keep things moving along to make sure you get through all of the topics. So I'm trying to visualize a meeting agenda in my mind as I'm walking through this. So for each agenda item, I had mentioned like the verb associated. What are we doing here? And are we discussing, making a decision, informing, creating, aligning, and so on. So that's clear to the person when they review the agenda in advance, what's going to be expected during that portion of the meeting, what they need to prepare for. I would also put who's facilitating that section. I would also have a spot for note taking directly next to that portion of the meeting so that the notes are associated with the proper topic. And then any commitments that are made and deadlines by which things must be completed, again, associated with that. I'll call it that line item. So if someone during that discussion commits to taking action, that name should be put down and what the action is and the deadline by which it's to be completed. So you literally have everything from the moment you start discussing all the key points that you need in one place. And I love it being a live doc, so anybody can access it at any time and go back and look who committed to what and by when, and that becomes an action item list. That's the task list that everybody will be working from until the next meeting. So I think it's important as you're building the agenda to have the space for all of those components. So obviously, I know this might sound like I'm being extra anal, but if you're truly trying to build this, to me, it would be in landscape format because you're putting so much across all related to one agenda item, not like a portrait format because there's so much info to put. I know that's a detail you probably didn't need, but I thought it was necessary. Okay, I think that's the majority of the meeting agenda. So again, maybe the structure is starting with a welcome and grounding. Maybe it's wins since the last time you saw one another. Then you have your discussion items. Then you have, clarity around owners of the tasks and the timelines by which they need to complete things. I always, even though the note taker is taking the note of what the commitments are, at the end, I think it's important to summarize what's next and review that. Okay, it looks like Matthew has committed to editing the podcast and getting it out on time, which is by Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time. Cool. There was like an underlying message in that, by the way. And everybody is listed and reviewed in that part of the agenda. So like if I were the facilitator, I'd go through, here are the commitments that were made at this meeting, any questions, clarifications before we go. It also helps kind of summarize and make sure everybody knows. It's kind of like reinforcing the purpose of the meeting. We were able to do all of these things, and here's where we're headed next. Things are going to come up during the meeting that are not on the agenda for that day. I think it's important to have, I always kept it as a separate parking lot, just a little section where if something comes up, it's not already on the agenda. It goes into the parking lot, which means, hey, if we finish early, we can come to that, or we'll automatically add that to the next agenda. So whoever's responsibility it is for going in and building the agenda would pull over anything from the parking lot that is actually important to be a part of a meeting. Maybe it's not something that needs to be covered in a meeting. Maybe it's an email. But I think it's important to note that too. So don't let those rabbit holes and other things that come up lead to distraction and your inability to keep to the timeline and the important topics. You could have a parking lot for that later. So hopefully that's helpful in kind of looking at the agenda. Once you have an agenda template built, it's super easy to use and reuse every time. To me, the majority of the time invested is the first time you create the template in a way that's going to work for you and your team. Once everybody's familiar with it, it's so simple to implement. So it is that leader's responsibility to guide the flow. I had mentioned different roles before. So a note taker, a timekeeper. So maybe the timekeeper is paying attention to the time and mentions, hey, 2-minute warning on this section, right? And then the facilitator would know how they need to help navigate, maybe pulling someone back in that's going down a rabbit hole. They can very strategically kindly bring people back to focus when necessary. Also, the facilitator is really helpful in inviting people who might be a little bit more quiet, who aren't going to immediately jump into the conversation and share their thoughts. Maybe they're more of a listener, they are a processor, they need more time. So the facilitator can really invite feedback, comments from someone who is a quieter voice in the room and know how to appropriately do so without putting them on the spot. My strategy has always been like, if I know that someone's going to be uncomfortable speaking about something, I might say, hey, just wanted to let you know, I'm going to ask you to talk about this in a couple of minutes, so be ready. And then bounce back, continue the conversation. So they're sitting over there, they're figuring it out, getting comfortable with what they want to say, and then they can add to the conversation. If it's not something that was already in the agenda and they're prepared for in advance because they took the time to read the agenda and make sure they had what they needed. Speaking of what they needed, something else that I always put in my meeting agendas that I forgot to add is I would have a section that said resources. If there were any resources that someone needed to bring to a meeting, to have present with them in order to fully engage in that topic, I would always list that too. Resources that need to be reviewed prior to coming to the meeting. It would really help make sure that people come prepared with everything that they need. So yes, the facilitator's role is very important, and that's why I say this is more of a leadership skill and does take practice and honing over time, because you do have to rein people in a lot and keep them on topic, but do so in a way that doesn't make them feel like you're cutting them off, you're being disrespectful, that what they have to say isn't important. You're helping them to see the value of sticking to the agenda, and everybody walks away feeling like they have what they need. I mentioned at the beginning of this that I used this opportunity with the team to ask them for feedback on what they were missing when they stopped having their meeting. And that was really helpful in seeing how we could more intentionally craft that specific team's agenda. And based off of how that went, I would actually recommend that to any team, to actually spend some time, maybe as you head into the new year, looking at your typical meeting agenda and asking, is there anything we can do to make this more effective? Is everybody getting what they need out of the meetings? What is something that we're not doing that we should be doing? What is something we're doing that can be removed that people don't actually find value in? But really, like, doing a meeting agenda refresh and using everybody's feedback to help craft an updated agenda. That might be something that everybody could benefit from doing on occasion to make sure it's still serving its purpose. So something to consider there. So I also want to point out that the next step after that is, of course, the follow through. You have to finish with the follow through. The meeting kind of continues after the meeting with all the completion of, assigned tasks. So in my mind, a meeting isn't successful if the next steps aren't clear, the owners haven't been identified, and the deadlines aren't known. So that's why I said you want to end with summarizing that. And it depends on how you want to facilitate it. If you want to send out any reminders, hey, we're coming up on our next meeting, don't forget to check your commitments from last time, until people kind of get used to this new framework that you're using. But I think it's important that we close meetings with very clear intentions as to what's next, and people are truly held accountable to that. Because if the next meeting, they're supposed to have something complete and supposed to be presenting it, and all of a sudden that doesn't make it onto the agenda for the next meeting, they're going to be like, why did I waste my time on this? We didn't use it anyway. So who is doing what by when should be on there, and you should make sure that if that next step involves further discussion or decision or creation or whatever it may be in the meeting next time, that it is carried over to the next agenda. So it's building accountability, but also building trust that people are going to follow through and the things that they're being asked to do are actually meaningful. So hopefully that's helpful in thinking about how to make the time spent in meetings count. We're having a clear purpose for the meeting. We're making sure the right people are in the room and they know what their purpose is. We're creating an agenda in advance, live doc. Anybody can look at it in advance, and very carefully crafting it with all the components that we need. Making sure we have roles identified in the meeting as necessary, so everybody knows how they're contributing, and also making sure that we're keeping it on time, the flow that's necessary in it being meaningful, and of course the follow through, making sure next steps are summarized and actually the tasks are things that you're going to be held accountable for. So let me shift gears real quick into our typical Leadership Unscripted segment because the topic connects back to this today. So if you're not familiar with Leadership Unscripted, these are questions that are sent in by listeners for myself and a guest to unpack during a podcast. So this week it says, I have a team member who rarely speaks up in meetings. They do good work, but I know they have valuable ideas we're missing. How do I help them find their voice? And such a perfect fit for this episode. So I immediately thought of my high S, 69% of the population is highest in S. So it's very common in any team. And the S's have to be prepared. They have to feel like they know what's coming and they've had time to think about something. So, a follow-up question for me is, do they actually know what's coming up in a meeting so that they are prepared? Because if you are allowing them the opportunity before the meeting, I bet they're going to feel more comfortable sharing their perspective when given the opportunity. Maybe change the expectations that you have in the meeting for that person. Is there a different way that they're more comfortable sharing until they get more comfortable sharing in this team setting? I don't know all of the details associated with this. Instead of it being like an open discussion where people who do all the talking kind of take over, and maybe this person doesn't want to interrupt or step on any toes, so they're sitting back quietly. Maybe we need to change that up and be more intentional about the flow and do more structured turn taking as you go through and are sharing discussion points, rather than them feeling like maybe they can't get a word in edgewise. I know that's common. There's usually one talkative person in a meeting. So maybe they're just not feeling that they can get their thoughts or comments in without interrupting someone else. I know that happens all the time, where someone starts to say something, you see them like take the breath and open their mouth, and someone else talks, and it's like, oh, okay. Well, by the time it comes back to me, I often forget what I was going to say, and we don't want that happening. So maybe more structured turn taking. They know what to expect. Everybody gets a chance. Any opportunity for them to develop their voice, as like it was listed here. I think it was, how can I help them find their voice? Maybe helping them develop it more privately and build on that until they're more comfortable in that team setting. So what would it look like to ask them one-on-one some of the questions that you've been asking in the team setting where you're not getting a ton of feedback from them? And let them build their confidence, reassure them that they have great ideas. And then maybe in that conversation say, oh, that's a great idea. I'd love for you to share it at our next meeting. Well, they've already shared it with you, and you can kind of gauge their level of comfort of now taking that idea and bringing it forward. Maybe that's the positive reinforcement they needed to know that they can bring value to that meeting. So that's just a couple of ideas. I think it's in the prep that you allow them to do by having a good agenda in place. I think it is also in kind of how you allow them to practice the skill set in advance, then give them the opportunity to come in the team setting and maybe share, then maybe adding more structure to the meeting to make it easier. So those are the things that came to mind for that one. Hopefully that is helpful. So I actually... I feel like I have had a pattern of this lately where I haven't been saying the name or names of the people that I wanted to highlight for my leadership in the wild, because they end up being clients and I can't just say their names out loud. But this is that same thing. I can't help it. I'm sorry, but it just connects back to this topic. So with the team that had eliminated the meetings, there was further discussion, and I think that there were a couple of individuals on that team that really saw it as an opportunity to redesign things and make it a better use of everyone's time. I sent out an email to everyone directly asking for their feedback on what they were missing the most from the meeting and so on. But there were team members that met with me specifically to kind of work through what this could look like, how we could redesign it to make it more effective. How do they go about rolling it out? But they really kind of took charge of that and stepped up and didn't really need to do so. And so I just wanted to point out and highlight that for leadership in the wild, that though something was being done differently, they found value in the change to be able to use it as a reset to improve things. So I just wanted to compliment that because it could have been the end of the world that we're now not having meetings, and this was very important to me and I'm crushed and all of that. But instead it was, okay, where can we go from here? And I think that they approached it in a very, intentional way to make sure that everyone was getting what they needed. So shout out to you. You know who you are. I appreciate the way that you took advantage of the opportunity to make things better and didn't focus on the fact that it wasn't exactly how you envisioned it happening. So as I move back to our branching out challenge as we close up any episode, hopefully as we went through this episode, you heard one or more things that you might like to change about a meeting. Maybe it's being more clear about the purpose or who's in the room, or maybe you're going to do an overhaul of your meeting agenda. But my challenge to you is to take the time to talk with your team about areas in which they feel you could improve meetings to make it a better use of their time. Even when I asked feedback from that team about the meetings, I asked about the length of time they were willing to invest in the meetings. And actually it was pretty consistent. Before, I think they were having like an hour and a half meeting, and then they go over and they keep talking, and it could be up to 2 hours, and there wasn't really an end time, and it just continued until everybody's done. But when actually asked, most people said, I wouldn't want more than 45 minutes to an hour. So once you add that structure and make things time bound, and you see, here's what the feedback states, I can invest this amount of time as long as I get this out of it, it made it very clear and easy. So if it may be for the branching out challenge, you decide to get feedback, maybe that's another thing that you could ask. How much time would you be willing to invest in the meeting? What would be appropriate before you check out and get distracted? A lot of people can't sit and focus past 45 minutes or an hour. So getting that clear feedback. So I hope you enjoyed this episode and you found something that you could apply to your own meetings with your teammates, with clients, with anyone. It doesn't matter if it's Zoom or in person. I feel like these things apply, but it comes down to truly making every minute count for everybody in the room or in the virtual room. So as I close out this episode, I want to remind you, we're about to move into the new year. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. We're really focusing in on sponsorships for the podcast in 2026. So if you have someone you know that might be interested, or you have interest in hearing about our sponsorship packages and seeing opportunities to have some commercials built in to our episodes, please reach out. You can shoot us an email at info@branchingoutpodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Also, if you want to submit any questions or challenges, you can submit that for Leadership Unscripted to that same exact email address. You can also visit our website at branchingoutpodcast.com, and you can submit a guest application if you're interested in joining us for an episode. Just a reminder that we do record this in a physical studio, so we would need you to come to Winchester, Virginia if you're willing to do so. So we would love to have some more applications rolling in 2026 as we're mapping out our plan. So our episodes do drop Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time. So if you subscribe, you will get those notifications and won't have to constantly check back and see if it's out yet. But I hope that you do that. You get the reminders. You like us, you follow us, you give us feedback, and let us know how we can improve. Until next time, keep branching out.